Plebes Unam presentas
Elecciones presidenciales en la historia mexicana.
The 41st presidential election in Mexican history took place on June 2nd, 2024, after beating the political establishment of Mexico. Andrés Manuel López Obrador entered office with high hopes and a whopping approval rating of 76%. Did he live up to expectations? Well, let us go over what he did during his tenure. He tried to maintain Mexican independence while building up relationships with other Latin American left-wing governments, maintaining neutrality during the Venezuelan presidential drama, giving political asylum to Bolivian President Evo Morales after the 2019 Bolivian coup, and publicly supporting Peruvian President Pedro Castillo after he was impeached. Domestically, AMLO's biggest test was the COVID-19 pandemic, and while he had some issues initially, as he continued to hold rallies with supporters and had more lax views on masking and such, but he did take precautions as things heated up, even going so far as to have Mexican TV stations hold lessons on the air to encourage people to stay home. And, somewhat related, he tried to implement a universal healthcare policy. Its implementation was rather mixed, but ultimately, you could still technically say Mexico had universal healthcare. He implemented some social programs to help the elderly, and he made good on his promise on a referendum during his term. And surprisingly, he ended up winning that. But if you remember AMLO, you know that he had three major goals during his presidential campaign: renationalization of resources, combating political corruption, and ending the violent drug war. While he was unable to do much regarding Pemex, he was able to pass nationalization of their lithium reserves. Corruption was interesting, as he attempted to push for a trial of all the past presidents, but was only able to get some people tertiarily affiliated with them arrested. Drugs and crime is where he faced his largest criticism, as his plan of abrazos no balazos was perceived as not doing well as crime continued to grow. Women were concerned with the rise of femicides, drug cartels were seemingly undeterred. Even as AMLO did push forward funding towards the Mexican armed forces for public safety, people still saw AMLO as too soft regarding security, to the point where the US media claimed that some Mexican states should be avoided altogether, and many American politicians threatened to invade Mexico, with AMLO supporters and AMLO detractors seeming to look at the exact same numbers and have vastly different interpretations, with crime being the most notable example of it. AMLO pointing to the fact that the percentage of crime went down during his tenure, while opposition figures pointed out the fact that raw numbers of crime went up during his tenure. However, right at the end of his term, AMLO pushed for one further policy. Prior to this point, AMLO was very critical of the Election Commission, the INE, claiming that it was corrupt and or bloated, blaming them for his 2 electoral losses. So he attempted to push some reforms to make the institution and Mexico's entire electoral system more democratic and streamlined, starting off with wanting to abolish the institution entirely and form a completely new institution, but then changing his mind to be a bit more lax, introducing policies ranging from firing some members of the INE who really didn't need to be there, reallocating funding, making so that the INE position is an elected position, making justices on the Supreme Court an elected position, and even getting rid of proportional representation. But some saw these reforms as possible democratic backsliding. Speaking of democracy, midterm elections did happen before this one, and unlike prior, there weren't any new major parties that emerged in this time period. However, the 3 establishment parties decided to unite together under one electoral coalition called the Va por Mexico coalition, as it was the only way that they could even come close to beating AMLO. However, they still could not do so, as his party retained a slim lead in the Chamber of Deputies, Senate, and overwhelmingly won the most governorships. With all the pretexts out of the way, let's move on to the election itself. Why don't we start on the governing party's side, since they're the guys to beat? We had a rebranded Sigamos Haciendo Historia, or Let's Keep Making History, similar to the short-lived Trump rebrand, but this time they actually kept it. There was a lingering fear that many in the Mexican and American media had that AMLO, through his reforms, would attempt to break the one-term precedent implemented, similar to how some other Latin American leaders kind of skirted on certain things when they did some electoral reforms. However, AMLO vehemently denied that throughout the entirety of his tenure, because this is like the one thing you can't break about the Mexican presidency. Because every time someone tries to break that precedent, things don't really turn out so well for them. So not only did he not try, he also made sure that he wanted to smooth over the process for his party and coalition to choose the nominee, inviting all the top contenders who wanted to run to make sure there was no favoritism and to let the process play out as smooth as it can be. The process they all agreed on was as follows. There will be 5 presidential polls conducted to determine who is the winner. 1 conducted by the coalition itself, 4 by pollsters that were trusted by the coalition. The second and third place candidates will be put in the administration of the winner. All contenders for the race must resign from any government positions that they currently hold, rather than the current system of taking a leave of absence, with the idea being that you can take your seat back should you fail, in order to prevent any of them from using their positions in government to get favoritism in the polls. And last, they would only have 6 people run for the nomination. When the process to register was open, 6 people immediately came and signed up for the nomination process. There was former Governor of Chiapas, Manuel Velasco Coello, representing PVEM, Federal Deputy Gerardo Fernandez Noroña, who represented PT, Senator and former Governor of Zacatecas, Ricardo Manuel Avila, representing Morena, former Governor of Tabasco and Secretary of the Interior, Adán Augusto López, representing Morena, Secretary of Foreign Affairs and 2012 PRD presidential candidate Marcelo Ebrard, representing Morena, and lastly, Head of Government of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum, once again representing Morena. Velasco and Noroña were very clearly representing their own individual parties, Monreal serving as a representation of his prominent political family, Lopez very obviously trying to paint himself as just AMLO 2.0. The 2 candidates that most, if not all people, realized were the real contenders of the race were Marcelo Ebrard and Claudia Sheinbaum, both of whom being close to AMLO, but also far enough to have their own individual identities. And both of them knew that it was going to be a pretty contentious race. AMLO even going so far as to say that if the race is too contentious and there really couldn't be a chance, he would make a formal endorsement of one of the 2. And of the 2, Marcelo was the one who was the most scared. Fun fact, remember this rule? It was actually put into place by Marcelo Ebrard in order to sway Claudia Sheinbaum to not run in the election. But she followed suit anyways. And it seemingly didn't even get to the point where they needed to do any endorsements, because Claudia Sheinbaum was the very clear favorite from day one, winning a pretty decent margin all things considered, making her the first Jewish person nominated to be president in Mexican history. However, Ebrard decided to decry the results regardless, even though there was really no major reasons to be mad outside of the results not being in his favor, with Party President Martin Delgado openly stating that even if there was any skew, the margin of Sheinbaum's win was too big to be changed by any factors. Ebrard would then decide to form a separate political group within Morena called El Camino de Mexico. What was his purpose of doing so? But why don't we shift to the other side of the aisle? The Va por Mexico coalition had rebranded into the Frente Amplio por Mexico in a vain attempt to expand the coalition to include the citizens' movement, but there was not an immediate chance for them to join. Despite this, the coalition did have a lot of people vying for the top spot. 33 candidates, in fact. But that was just step 1 in a multi-step plan that was going to whittle down the candidates to the perfect nominee. Next, they needed to collect 150,000 signatures, with at least 1,000 of them from 17 states, to be collected by August 8th. August 10th, they would hold a forum. Then, the following week, they would hold round 1 of polling to determine the 3 possible finalists. Then from the 17th to the 24th, they would hold another round of forums, to which a second round of polling will be done by the 27th to the 30th, which basically counts as half of the results to choose the nominee, with the results being held privately until September 3rd, where they open the doors to online voting, which determines the other half of the percentage needed to win. And after all the voting is done, the same day, they choose who the nominee is. And very quickly, the numbers started dwindling. 20 were eliminated almost immediately, 2 decided that they had no chance and dropped out. Meanwhile, 11 actually tried to make it to the polling process. However, only 4 people managed to even make it to polling. Former Secretary of Tourism Enrique de la Madrid of the PRI, President of the Chamber of Deputies and perennial presidential candidate Santiago Creel of the PAN, Senator and former governor of Tlaxcala Beatriz Paredes of the PRI, and lastly, Mexican Senator Xochitl Galvez, who's had quite the party array memberships under her belt, but technically she decided to run in this race as an independent. The first round went off without a hitch, leaving these 3 to run in the next 2 rounds. However, something odd happened. Right before the second poll was to begin being conducted, Santiago Creel announced that he was suspending his bid to support Xochitl Galvez, and the PRD followed suit in supporting her bid, leaving just these 2 to compete in the second poll. And despite the fact that the poll was supposed to be released in September, they decided, you know what, let's just release it on the 31st of August, which showed that Paredes didn't really have a good chance of winning the nomination. So the PRI decided to stop supporting her bid and decided to support Xochitl, essentially leaving Paredes with no other option than to suspend her bid for the presidency. And this led to many people to start theorizing that, in fact, Xochitl might have actually been El Dedazo in disguise. After the process was finished, the coalition decided to rebrand a second time to become the Fuerza y Corazón por Mexico coalition, seemingly again opening the doors for anybody else who wants to join the coalition. And the reason why they were so intent was because the citizens movement was kind of back and forth on what they wanted to do in this election. There were 2 major factions within the party. One was led by Governor of Jalisco, Enrique Alfaro Ramirez, who wanted to join the Fuerza y Corazón coalition, while others, like party leader Dante Delgado, wanted the party to remain electorally independent. And this led to many prominent members of the party to kind of go back and forth on whether or not they actually wanted to run, because of worries that a split opposition would lead to Sheinbaum easily winning the election. While Delgado himself really did not want to run, he left the door open in case someone else didn't want to. His 2 ideal choices for the nomination were Governor of Nuevo León, Samuel Garcia, and Mayor of Monterrey, Luis Donaldo Colosio Riojas. And to throw another wrench in the field, it seems that Marcelo Ebrard floated himself as a potential candidate of Movimiento Naranja, as him and Monreal were apparently in talks with Delgado very early on in the race to leave Morena and join his party in order to pursue their own political pursuits. While Colosio denied, for reasons we'll never understand, Samuel Garcia was very open to the idea, and as such, ended up getting the nomination very easily. However, an issue arose when Garcia actually tried to begin his campaign. When he requested his leave of absence, he also requested that a member of his own party be chosen as the successor for governorship of Nuevo León. However, while the Nuevo León government was very happy to grant his leave of absence, they were not happy with letting his party retain control, and would only appoint people of their own parties, which led into massive conflicts in the Nuevo León capital between politicians of the opposition, protesters who were in support of Garcia, Garcia's own party. Everybody was basically fighting, culminating in Garcia just deciding to drop out of the race and return to his seat because he technically did not start running, leading to the MC to announce an emergency conference to pick a new nominee, with them ultimately deciding to take the person who was leading the presidential campaign of Garcia, a lowly federal deputy named Jorge Alvarez Mañez, to be the torchbearer for the party. Were there any other prominent candidates outside of the major parties? A couple of people tried to run, but ultimately none of them were able to get on the ballot, so this was basically just a 3-person race. First one in a while, actually. This election immediately became interesting for 2 reasons. 1, technically, this is the first election where the PRI doesn't have a presidential candidate running. And 2, barring a really big upset, Mexico was going to be electing a female president. Despite the fact that he wasn't running, AMLO seemed to be a majority of the focus for a lot of people, seeing this election as a second referendum on his administration. Galvez focusing her attacks on AMLO's policies, claiming Sheinbaum was just a puppet of AMLO and the drug cartels. Sheinbaum claiming that Galvez was a pawn of the Mexican political establishment, to the point where sometimes she wouldn't even refer to her by name, she would just refer to her as the candidate of the PRIAN. Meanwhile, Mañez was basically just vibing in 3rd place, focusing on his personality and platform, knowing that he probably didn't have a chance to win, so it was better to just focus on building up the MC's brand. The only times he would get attacked were from MC dissidents who wanted them to drop out and support the opposition coalition, and said opposition coalition who pressured him up to the end to suspend and endorse them. But as the race continued, their attacks became a lot more lopsided. Sheinbaum's focusing on issues and policies, claiming that Xochitl would end the social programs that AMLO implemented, which Galvez promised with her own blood she would not do, while Galvez and the opposition would focus a lot more on personality and other characteristics, such as many of them, including former President Vicente Fox, attacking Sheinbaum for being Jewish, with the debates perfectly exemplifying this. Galvez going on the offensive in all 3, making various claims towards Claudia and her party with very little accuracy, even claiming that her party's leader, Mario Delgado, was arrested for drug trafficking by using the records of a different Mario Delgado, while Sheinbaum would focus on attacking Galvez for her alleged neoliberal leanings. Meanwhile, Mañez would just smile at the camera, ignoring the 2 old ladies arguing, which led to him getting a boost in support online. Another thing that boosted his attention was literally almost dying, when at a campaign event in Nuevo Leon, the stage collapsed, which killed 9 people and injured 121 others, with Mañez basically ending the campaign right then and there, which again mattered little because polls very clearly showed how the race was going to pan out. And here are the results. Unsurprisingly, Sheinbaum won with 61.18% of the popular vote, Galvez got second with 28.11% of the vote, and Mañez got 10.57% of the vote. Sheinbaum, much like AMLO, won all but 1 state, but not the same state. The legislative chambers were very similar, her coalition wiping the floor with Galvez's. Galvez would claim some issues and say that she intended to challenge the results, but nothing seemed to materialize from that. Speaking of materialization, a little bit of the opposite happened to one of the parties. Can you take a wild guess which one? With this election finally solidifying the death of the PRD, which had been slowly dying ever since AMLO left the party back in 2012. With the 2 members that actually did end up getting elected this year just deciding to flip and join Morena, which has officially painted itself as Mexico's new mainstream political party. Will that last? I don't know. Te veré para las próximas elecciones, amigo. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you want more content from me, consider supporting me on Patreon.